Courtrooms get quiet fast when somebody underestimates the wrong person. I have always thought the most revealing thing about people is how they act when they think you have nothing left. That is usually when they say exactly what they really believe. Monday morning in downtown Chicago felt colder than usual. Gray sky outside. Wind moving hard between buildings. The courthouse steps crowded with attorneys carrying leather briefcases and people hurrying through metal detectors with coffee in hand. Camille Brooks walked through the front entrance alone. Navy dress. Clean lines. Knee length. No flashy jewelry. No designer labels anyone could brag about. Just a black leather handbag over one shoulder and a calm expression she had practiced carrying for a long time. The courtroom doors opened and she stepped inside. Polished wood benches. Bright overhead lights. A judge's bench at the front. Quiet voices echoing off the walls. Graham Sullivan was already seated at the table across from hers. Tailored charcoal suit. Silver watch. His attorney Rebecca Hayes beside him flipping through a thick stack of documents like she already knew how the morning would end. Graham looked up the second Camille walked in. His eyes moved over her once. Then he leaned back in his chair and gave that familiar half-smile she had not missed since the divorce. The kind that always came right before something sharp. Camille. His voice was low enough for the people nearby to hear. You actually came. She pulled out her chair and sat down without looking rattled. Graham rested one arm on the table. I was not sure you could afford to keep this going. Rebecca smiled politely, but did not look up. A court clerk nearby glanced over, then quickly backed down at paperwork. Camille set her bag on the table, unzipped it, took out one clean legal folder, and placed it neatly in front of her. No reaction. Graham gave a small laugh. Still doing that. She looked up finally. Calm. Doing what? Pretending. Rebecca adjusted her glasses and softly said, Counsel should probably stay focused. But even she sounded amused. Graham folded his hands. I mean seriously, Camille. We both know this has gone on long enough. Camille opened her folder, turned one page, smoothed the corner with her fingertips. Then maybe we should let the court decide that. Graham smiled wider. That would be fine with me. People began filing into the benches behind them. Another attorney sat near the aisle. Someone whispered. Papers shifted. The room gradually filled. Camille kept her breathing steady. She had been in rooms like this before. Rooms where people decided your whole story based on one look. The dress. The silence. The fact that you walked in alone. It never bothered her as much anymore. What bothered her was how predictable it always felt. Graham leaned in slightly. You barely made rent last year. He said it casually, like conversation, like a harmless reminder. Rebecca looked down fast to hide a smile. Camille closed the folder and rested one hand on top of it. That was last year. Graham chuckled under his breath. Exactly. Then the side door opened, and everyone stood as the judge entered. Black robe, reading glasses, sharp expression. The room settled immediately. Camille rose with everyone else, then sat when instructed. The judge glanced through the docket. Brooks versus Sullivan. Graham straightened confidently. Rebecca prepared her notes. Camille folded her hands once on the table. The judge looked directly at her. Mrs. Brooks, do you intend to contest the financial disclosure submitted this morning? Graham already looked satisfied before she answered. Camille lifted her eyes. Calm as ever. Yes, Your Honor. Then she slowly reached into her handbag. Graham smiled like he thought he already knew exactly where this was going. He was wrong. The room stayed quiet enough to hear papers moving. Camille kept one hand inside her black handbag while the judge looked over the file in front of him. Graham leaned back like he had already won. Rebecca had her pen ready. A clerk near the wall adjusted a stack of folders and glanced toward Camille for a second before looking away again. Camille slowly pulled out a slim black wallet. Nothing dramatic. No rush. Just calm hands. Graham smiled like this was proving his point. That is what you brought? He asked under his breath. Camille did not answer. She opened the wallet and slid one card free between her fingers. Matte black. Clean edges. No flashy logo across the front. Just a small silver emblem near the corner. Then she placed it flat on the polished wood table. The sound was soft, barely louder than paper, but somehow the whole room heard it. Rebecca stopped moving immediately. Graham looked down, then blinked once. The smile faded from his face faster than Camille expected. The judge paused mid-sentence. Even the clerk near the wall stared. Graham leaned forward hard enough for his chair to shift slightly. Camille finally looked at him. Calm. The same expression she walked in with. Graham stared at the card. He knew exactly what it was. Anyone in certain financial circles would. Invitation only. Private banking. The kind of card people never talk about publicly because nobody needs to. Rebecca recovered first. Your Honor, she said quickly, I am not sure what relevance. Camille slid a second document beside the card. It relates directly to the disclosure filed this morning. The judge adjusted his glasses. Approach. Camille stood and stepped forward. Rebecca joined her with Graham right behind. The judge reviewed the first page, then the second. Camille could see the shift in his expression. Small but obvious. Rebecca saw it too. This cannot be correct, she said. Camille kept her voice level. It is current as of Friday. Graham took the papers. His eyes moved faster with each line, then slower. Then he read the same section again. Camille watched color leave his face. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to notice. There was something strange about seeing someone finally realize they built their confidence on outdated information. Graham lowered the papers. Where did this come from? Camille almost smiled. My accountant. Rebecca flipped through another page. These holdings are not listed under Brooks. No, Camille said. They are listed under Brooks Capital Management. Rebecca looked up sharply. Graham stared at her. You started an investment firm? Camille folded her hands in front of her. 3 years ago. The judge kept reading. These statements show substantial liquid assets. Camille nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Graham gave a dry laugh that sounded forced. Since when? Camille looked directly at him. Since around the time you stopped paying attention. The silence after that landed hard. A man sitting on the bench behind them lowered his newspaper. Someone near the back shifted in their seat. The courtroom suddenly felt much smaller than before. Graham looked back down at the black card. Then the statements. Then Camille. Like the picture was rearranging itself in real time, and he hated every second of it. Rebecca spoke carefully. There may need to be an amendment to our request. The judge nodded without looking up. That seems obvious. Graham's jaw tightened. Camille picked up the black card and held it between 2 fingers before sliding it back into her wallet. Simple. Quiet. But the effect stayed. Graham watched every movement. And when Camille reached into her bag one more time and pulled out another sealed folder with his law office address printed clearly across the front, his expression changed again. The courtroom felt different now. Not louder. Somehow quieter. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they may have misunderstood the situation from the beginning. Camille held the sealed folder in one hand while Graham stared at the name printed across the front. Sullivan Legal Group. His own office address underneath it. Rebecca noticed it too and immediately reached toward the folder. Camille did not hand it over yet. She looked at the judge first. Your Honor, this directly relates to the financial disclosure and the settlement request filed this morning. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Camille stepped forward and placed the folder carefully on the bench. The seal had already been broken. The judge opened it and began reading. Graham shifted in place. He still looked composed from a distance. But Camille knew him well enough to catch every small sign. His shoulders tighter, jaw set harder, eyes moving quicker than before. Rebecca leaned in closer. What exactly is this? Camille folded her hands calmly. Updated ownership records. Graham let out a short dry laugh. Ownership of what? Camille looked directly at him. The building on West Monroe Street. Rebecca frowned, then went still. Graham's expression changed immediately. Fast enough that even the clerk noticed and looked up again. The judge kept reading through the file, then adjusted his glasses and read a section twice. Mrs. Brooks, he said evenly. These documents indicate Brooks Capital Management acquired controlling interest in the Monroe Executive Building 18 days ago. Camille nodded. That is correct. Graham stared at her like he had not heard properly. That is impossible. Camille stayed calm. It is filed with the county. Rebecca quickly flipped through her copy of the paperwork, and her face lost color by the second. Graham leaned forward. My office is there. Yes, Camille said softly. I know. There was something about saying it that made the room feel colder. Not dramatic. Just real. Graham looked genuinely shaken now. You bought the building where my firm operates. Camille met his eyes without blinking. Not personally. My company did. Rebecca tried to recover. That has nothing to do with this divorce settlement. The judge looked up. Actually, it may. The petitioner claimed Mrs. Brooks lacked financial stability and required restructuring terms based on limited earning potential. He closed the folder halfway. That claim appears inaccurate. A low whisper passed through the benches behind them. Somebody cleared their throat. Graham ignored all of it. His focus stayed locked on Camille. When Camille answered honestly, 3 weeks after our last mediation. Why did not you say anything? She almost smiled. Because nobody asked the right questions. That landed harder than she expected. Rebecca looked frustrated now. She turned another page and stopped. There is a lease review attached. Camille nodded once. Renewal schedules. Occupancy reports. All current. Graham took the papers from Rebecca and scanned them quickly. His eyes froze on one line. Camille recognized the exact page. Lease renewal option pending approval. Graham looked up immediately. You reviewed my office contract. Camille kept her voice. Even. My team reviews every tenant contract. The judge sat back, watching both of them now. Graham lowered the papers slowly. The confidence from earlier was gone. Completely. He looked at Camille like he was finally seeing the version of her that had existed long before this courtroom, and somehow he had missed it. Rebecca whispered something to him. He barely heard her. Camille picked up her pen and placed it beside her folder. Calm hands. Steady breathing. No rush. Then the judge turned one final page and paused. His expression sharpened. There is another disclosure here regarding a pending acquisition tied to Brooks Capital. Graham looked up fast. Camille already knew what page he had reached. And when the judge read the address aloud, Graham stopped moving entirely. The courtroom stayed completely still after the judge read the address out loud. Graham looked like he had stopped breathing for a second. Rebecca leaned over the bench so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Camille already knew what she would see when she read the page. The acquisition paperwork. The one Graham never imagined would matter inside a divorce hearing. The judge lowered the document and looked directly at Camille. Mrs. Brooks, these records show Brooks Capital Management is finalizing purchase of the Lakeview Plaza property on North LaSalle. Camille nodded once. That is correct, Your Honor. Graham blinked hard. That is a commercial tower. Yes. Camille kept her voice calm. 31 floors. Rebecca took the papers from the judge's clerk and scanned quickly. Her expression changed halfway down the page. Graham saw it immediately. Rebecca. She did not answer. Camille watched both of them without saying a word. Rebecca finally looked up. Graham. He took the file from her hands. His eyes moved fast, then stopped completely. Camille recognized the exact line he landed on. Primary tenant agreement. Sullivan Legal Group. Graham slowly looked up at her. My firm has offices there. Camille folded one hand over the other. I know. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Even the judge paused. The clerk stopped typing. A man sitting near the back lowered his phone. Graham looked back at the file. You are buying the building my company is moving into next quarter? Camille answered simply. The closing is scheduled this afternoon. Rebecca tried to regain control. This is unrelated. The judge looked at her over his glasses. Counsel, your filing this morning specifically argued financial imbalance and claimed Mrs. Brooks lacked long-term capacity to maintain independent assets. He tapped the papers once. That argument appears increasingly weak. Rebecca went quiet. Graham still stared at the contract. His jaw tightened. You planned this. Camille shook her head. No, then after one calm breath she added. I planned my future. That landed harder. Graham sat back slowly. He looked like he wanted to argue but could not find the right sentence. Camille had seen that expression before, just never on him. Usually he always had an answer ready. Always knew how to stay ahead of the conversation. Not today. The judge continued reviewing the pages. There is also a liquidity confirmation attached. Camille nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge read the statement, then looked up again. Brooks Capital has sufficient funds to complete the acquisition without financing. Rebecca closed her folder. No comments. No pushback. Graham stared straight ahead at nothing for a second, then finally looked at Camille. When did this happen? Her answer came easy. While you were focused on proving what I could not do. Graham gave a dry laugh that had no humor in it. You never said anything. Camille almost smiled. You never asked. That made a couple people on the benches glance at each other. It was such a simple sentence, but it cut right through the room. Graham looked down again. Camille could see the exact moment another thought hit him. His office lease, expansion plans, client meetings, everything tied to that tower. He looked back up fast. Camille. The first time that morning his voice sounded uncertain. Did you review our floor expansion request? Camille met his eyes. Calm. Honest. Personally. Rebecca turned sharply toward him. What floor expansion? Graham did not answer her. He already knew what Camille knew. The request was still pending approval. And for the first time since she walked into that courthouse carrying a plain black bag and saying almost nothing, Graham Sullivan fully understood he was no longer controlling this room. The energy in the courtroom had completely turned. Camille could feel it without looking around. The same people who barely noticed her when she walked in were paying attention now. The clerk, the attorneys on the benches. Even the judge had stopped glancing at the docket and was focused only on the file in front of him. Graham remained seated, but looked like he could not settle into the chair anymore. His fingers tapped once against the wood table and stopped. Rebecca opened her folder again, trying to rebuild momentum. Your Honor, the petitioner still believes the original settlement structure is reasonable. The judge looked over his glasses. Based on what exactly? Rebecca hesitated. It only lasted a second, but everyone saw it. Camille kept her posture straight, hands folded. Quiet. Graham leaned forward. Camille. His tone had changed. Less sharp. More controlled. Careful now. Why did you buy Lakeview Plaza? Camille looked at him calmly. Because it was a smart investment. That building was under contract for months. Yes. And you stepped in at the last minute. Camille gave a slight nod. My team moved quickly. Graham looked frustrated for the first time. Real frustration. Not performance. You knew my firm was relocating there. Camille answered honestly. I knew Sullivan Legal submitted expansion paperwork. Rebecca looked between them. This is beginning to sound personal. Camille turned toward her. No. Personal was this morning when your client said I could not afford to be here. That landed hard. Rebecca said nothing. The judge turned another page. Then stopped. Mrs. Brooks, these financial statements show significant portfolio growth over the past 30 months. Camille nodded. That is correct. And all independent from marital assets. Yes, Your Honor. Graham looked down immediately. He knew what that meant. Every argument they had built this morning was collapsing page by page. The judge kept reading. Equity holdings. Commercial real estate. Technology investments. Then he paused. And a substantial cash reserve. Rebecca quietly closed her pen. Graham exhaled slowly through his nose. Camille noticed him staring at the black handbag on the table. Same bag he probably dismissed the second she walked in. Funny how quickly perception changes once facts arrive. Graham looked up again. You could have told me. Camille held his gaze. When he blinked. She continued. During mediation when you assumed I needed support? A pause. Or last winter when you laughed and told me rebuilding was not realistic? Graham did not answer. He could not. Camille's voice stayed steady. Not angry. Not cold. Just clear. I stopped explaining myself a long time ago. The courtroom stayed quiet. The judge finally set the papers down and folded his hands. Based on the updated disclosure, this court sees no basis for the petitioner's request under the prior filing. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Graham looked toward her. She gave the smallest shake of her head. There was nothing left to argue. Camille reached into her bag again and pulled out a clean envelope. White. Sealed. She placed it on the table between them. Graham looked at the front and immediately recognized his own company logo. What is that? Camille answered simply. Your updated tenant agreement. Rebecca frowned. Tenant agreement? Camille nodded once. Your floor expansion approval. Graham stared at her. Confused now. Completely thrown off. You approved it? Camille met his eyes. Calm as ever. Open it. And suddenly, every person in that courtroom was watching his hands. Graham stared at the envelope like opening it might make the entire morning worse. Camille stayed seated with both hands folded neatly on the table. No pressure. No expression. Just calm. The judge watched. Rebecca looked tense enough to snap her pen in half. Finally, Graham picked up the envelope and broke the seal. Paper slid out. He unfolded it slowly. His eyes moved across the page once. Then again. His face changed immediately. Rebecca leaned closer. What is it? Graham did not answer. The judge looked over. Mr. Sullivan? Graham lowered the paper slightly. It is the approval. Rebecca frowned. For the expansion? Graham swallowed. Yes. Camille spoke for the first time in almost a full minute. Floor 21 and 22. Approved for 5 years under your original terms. Rebecca looked confused. Then why are we discussing this? Camille glanced at her. Because there is an addendum. Graham's eyes dropped back to the second page. His jaw tightened again. Rebecca reached for it and read quickly. Then she froze. Camille already knew the exact line they reached. Tenant improvement allowance covered in full by ownership. Rent unchanged for 3 years. Graham slowly looked up at Camille. You approve this? Camille nodded. Last Thursday. Why? She held his stare for a moment, then answered honestly. Because your employees should not lose workspace because of what happened between us. That hit harder than anything else she had said all morning. The room stayed still. Graham looked down at the paperwork like he suddenly did not know what to do with his hands. Rebecca carefully set the pages on the table. She had stopped pushing back completely now. The judge folded his arms, watching everything unfold. Graham finally spoke. Quiet. You could have blocked the expansion. Camille nodded once. Yes. And you did not. No, a long pause. Graham leaned back and looked at her in a way he had not since before the divorce. No smugness. No edge. Just trying to understand. Camille kept her voice level. I built Brooks Capital to create something solid, not to punish people. Graham blinked slowly. Camille continued. I know what it feels like when someone assumes you are done before you have even had a chance to rebuild. The clerk near the wall stopped typing again. Rebecca lowered her eyes. The judge turned to the updated filing and made a note. Graham glanced toward the black handbag beside Camille's chair, then at the legal folders, then back at her. How long have you been doing all this? 2.5 years. And you never told anyone? Camille almost smiled. I told the people who needed to know. Graham let out a breath. Not frustrated this time. More like disbelief mixed with something heavier. Regret maybe. The judge spoke clearly. Based on revised disclosures and current evidence, this court rejects the petitioner's request under the prior terms. Rebecca nodded without argument. Graham stayed quiet. The judge continued. Mrs. Brooks has demonstrated full financial independence and no basis exists for the requested adjustment. Papers moved. The clerk typed quickly. Camille reached for her folder and slid it closed. Simple. Controlled. Graham looked at her one more time. Camille. She paused. Yes. He hesitated longer than she expected. I was wrong. Rebecca turned slightly toward him in surprise. The room felt even quieter than before. Camille held his eyes. Calm as ever. About what? Graham glanced at the black card wallet on the table, then back to her. About thinking you would not recover. Camille looked at him for one long second, then reached for her bag. That was the easiest part. And when she stood up and the court clerk handed over one final printed confirmation with the Lakeview Plaza closing time stamped for exactly noon, Graham read the page and realized the biggest part of the story had not even happened yet. The printed confirmation stayed in Graham's hand while the judge finalized the court record. Noon. Lakeview Plaza closing confirmed. The exact time sat in black ink at the bottom of the page. Camille placed her legal folder back into her handbag and stood slowly. Calm. Nothing rushed. Rebecca had stopped writing altogether. The clerk printed the final court order and handed copies across the bench. The judge gave one last look over the room. This matter is resolved under revised terms. He struck the file closed and stood. Everyone rose as he exited through the side door. Then the room changed again. Quiet voices returned. Chairs shifted. Papers gathered. People started moving. But no one left immediately. Too many were still watching Camille. Graham stayed seated for another second with the printed confirmation in his hand, then stood. Camille. She paused near the end of the table and turned. His voice sounded unfamiliar now. Lower. Less polished. You really bought the building? Yes. Today. At noon. Graham gave a slow nod like he was trying to catch up to everything at once. Rebecca leaned closer to him. We should head back. He barely heard her. His eyes stayed on Camille. How long did you plan all this? Camille adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Long enough. Rebecca finally stepped in. Mrs. Brooks, if this affects our lease structure moving forward. Camille looked at her politely. It does not. Rebecca blinked. Camille continued. Your agreement stands exactly as written. Graham frowned. Even after this morning? Camille met his eyes. Business stays business. That left him quiet again. People in the gallery were filing out now. A few attorneys glanced toward Camille on the way out. One nodded respectfully. Another whispered something to a colleague while holding the courtroom door open. Graham looked down at the papers one last time, then at her. I told you once you would not recover after the divorce. Camille nodded. You did. And you remembered that. She gave a small breath through her nose. Some things stay with you. Graham's expression shifted. He looked around the emptying room and for the first time all morning, he seemed aware of exactly where he was standing. The same courtroom where he walked in confident. The same room where he assumed she would need something from him. Camille watched it hit him. Not all at once. Slowly. The truth settling in piece by piece. Rebecca touched his arm. We really need to go. He nodded but did not move. Camille, why approve the expansion? Her answer came simple. Because the people working for you had nothing to do with us. That stayed in the air for a second. Graham looked down, then back up. I did not expect that. Camille almost smiled. That was kind of the pattern today. Rebecca quietly gathered their files and headed for the aisle. Graham remained another moment. I underestimated you. Camille adjusted her handbag and looked toward the courtroom doors where cold Chicago daylight spilled through the glass. You underestimated what happens when somebody gets tired of proving themselves. Then she walked out. He followed a few steps behind. The courthouse hallway buzzed with footsteps and voices. Lawyers moving fast. Elevators opening and closing. Camille reached the marble lobby and checked her phone. A message had just come through from her closing team. Funds verified. Final signatures ready. Lakeview Plaza scheduled to transfer in less than 20 minutes. Graham saw the screen, saw her expression, then looked up toward the windows overlooking LaSalle Street. Because from that angle, across downtown Chicago, he could actually see the glass tower his firm had spent months preparing to move into. And for the first time all morning, Graham Sullivan realized Camille Brooks had already built an entirely new world while he was still looking at the old one. Chicago looked colder outside than it had that morning. The courthouse doors opened behind Camille, and a rush of downtown noise met her immediately. Wind between buildings. Taxis moving past LaSalle Street. People crossing with coffee cups and phones in hand. Her heels clicked against the stone steps as she came down slowly with her bag over one shoulder. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Brooks Capital. Closing team ready. Funds transferred. Final signatures waiting on the 29th floor at Lakeview Plaza. Camille looked at the screen for 1 second and kept walking. Behind her, she heard the courthouse doors open fast. Camille. Graham's voice. She stopped near the bottom of the steps, but did not turn right away. He reached her a second later. Code open. Court papers still in hand. Rebecca remained near the entrance on a phone call, clearly trying to manage the morning. Graham looked like he had more to say than he knew how to organize. Camille turned calmly. Yes. He glanced at her phone, then across downtown toward the glass tower in the distance. You are heading there now. Yes. For the closing. Yes. Graham gave one slow nod, then looked back at her. I still do not understand how you did all this without anyone knowing. Camille tucked her phone into her bag. People knew. Not me. She gave the smallest pause. That is true. A black SUV rolled up to the curb. Her driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Graham noticed. He looked at the building again. You really changed everything. Camille smiled faintly. No. I changed my direction. That landed harder than she expected. Graham stood quiet for a second. Traffic moved past behind them. Wind caught a few loose strands of Camille's hair and pushed them back. Graham looked tired now. Not physically, just emotionally. Like this morning had forced him to replay the last few years in his head. After the divorce, he started, then stopped. I assumed too much. Camille looked at him directly. Yes. He gave a short breath through his nose. I thought if you were quiet, it meant you were struggling. Camille nodded once. A lot of people think that. And I was wrong. You were. There was no anger in her voice. That seemed to bother him more. Rebecca ended her call and came closer. Graham, we have another meeting in 20 minutes. He barely glanced her way. 1 minute. Then back to Camille. Are you planning to change anything with our lease? Camille answered immediately. No, even now. Your team has a contract. It stays. Rebecca visibly relaxed. Graham stared at her. Why are you being fair to me? Camille looked toward the tower shining against the gray sky, then back at him. Because peace matters more than proving a point. He swallowed. That one hit deep. The SUV engine idled quietly beside them. The driver waited. Camille stepped toward the open door. Graham spoke one more time. Camille. She paused. I did not think you would ever stand here like this. She almost smiled. That was the difference. What difference? I did. Then she got into the SUV. The door closed softly. The car pulled away from the curb and merged into downtown traffic. Graham stayed standing on the courthouse steps watching it disappear. Rebecca beside him. Silent now. Across the city, Lakeview Plaza reflected the gray sky like polished glass. Camille checked her phone again as the car turned the corner. Final approval ready for signature. And just as the tower came fully into view through the windshield, another message appeared from her legal team with a single line that made her smile before she even reached the front doors. Tenant. Expansion request officially activated under new ownership. By noon, the gray Chicago sky had brightened just enough for sunlight to hit the glass front of Lakeview Plaza. Camille stepped out of the elevator onto the 29th floor with her black handbag on one shoulder and the city stretching behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her legal team stood near the conference table with documents ready. A closing attorney greeted her with a smile and slid over the final signature pages. Camille read every line carefully, then signed her name. Smooth. Steady. No hesitation. A minute later, her phone vibrated. Acquisition complete. Ownership transferred. Lakeview Plaza officially belonged to Brooks Capital Management. The room applauded lightly. Camille smiled and thanked everyone, then stepped toward the window overlooking LaSalle Street. Down below, the city kept moving like always. People crossing. Cabs turning corners. Nobody on the sidewalk knew a chapter of her life had just closed 30 floors above them. Her phone rang. Graham. She looked at the screen for a second before answering. Hello. His voice came quieter than she had ever heard it. Rebecca and I just finished reviewing the tenant documents. Camille rested one hand against the glass. Okay. A short pause. You really kept our original terms. Yes. And approved the expansion. Yes. Another pause. Then Graham spoke slower. You could have made things very difficult for me. Camille looked out across downtown. I could have. Why did not you? She answered honestly. Because I spent too much time rebuilding my life to waste energy tearing someone else down. The silence on the other end stayed there a few seconds. Then Graham exhaled. I should have understood you better. Camille smiled faintly. Maybe. I mean it. I know. He hesitated. I was embarrassed this morning. I noticed. That actually made him laugh once. Small. Real. Then he said something she did not expect. I was not embarrassed because of the courtroom. Camille listened. I was embarrassed because you became exactly who you said you would become, and I was too busy assuming you would fail to notice. Camille stayed quiet. Sometimes people finally tell the truth when there is nothing left to defend. Graham continued. You deserved more respect than I gave you. She looked at the sunlight hitting the neighboring buildings. Thank you. A long breath came through the phone. Then he said, Congratulations, Camille. She meant it when she answered. Thank you, Graham. They ended the call. No drama. No sharp ending. Just quiet. Real. Camille slipped the phone back into her bag. Her team was smiling nearby. Someone brought coffee into the conference room. Papers were being organized. Business moving forward. Life moving forward too. And standing there above Chicago, Camille thought about how often people mistake silence for weakness. It happens every day. At work. In families. In ordinary conversations. Someone talks louder. Dresses better. Seems more confident. And people assume they already know the whole story. But they rarely do. Real strength usually looks quieter than people expect. It looks like patience. It looks like rebuilding when nobody is clapping yet. It looks like staying focused when somebody underestimates you and choosing not to explain every move before it is time. That was the lesson she carried with her as she turned away from the window. You do not need everyone to believe in your progress while it is happening. You do not need to announce every win. And you definitely do not need revenge to prove your worth. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay steady. Let the truth arrive in its own time and walk into the next chapter knowing exactly who they are. Camille picked up her handbag, stepped toward the elevator, and smiled as the doors opened. The city was waiting, and this time she was walking into it on her own terms.